short list tonight. I guess it's just me and my boy Chris. How's it going, Chris?
Oh, it's going pretty good. Just tried to get some other people, but we had some technical difficulties. So we will steer this ship and try to keep the gales off of us.
Yeah, hopefully we can come together and have something worth listening to. So I've done this before on the end of the show. I'm going to try to do it in the beginning here. I'm going to take a bit from William, who does this on Liberty Bites. I just recorded a Liberty Bites episode, by the way. You can listen for that tomorrow on Wednesday. It's going to be about natural rights, but he puts the social media stuff up front. So I'm going to give that a try. So before we get into the meat here, remember you can find us on our website at think-liberty.com. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/thinkliberty.tl. You can find us on Twitter, Steemit, and Minds at think_liberty. And you can find us on Instagram by searching for Think Liberty, all one word. Also, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, anything like that you use to listen to podcasts. Please remember to go ahead and leave us a review and tell a friend. Telling friends is the best way. With all that out of the way, Chris, there is no shortage of things in the news here to talk about. Where do you want to start, buddy?
Well, I think we'll start off with a kind of exciting one, and one that's very memeable lately. The freaking Space Force, Trump.
Yes.
So, for those of you who don't know, which I don't know how you don't know, but so Trump just directed the Defense Department to immediately begin the process of establishing a Space Force as a sixth military branch. So basically he said that our destiny is beyond the earth, not in the matter of national identity, but a matter of national security. And so of course it sounds kind of laughable, and that Trump would be doing this, but it's actually been talked about in the past. Trump mentioned it about a year ago, and I do believe even Obama mentioned it once, and heck, even Ronald Reagan talked about Star Wars, which wasn't necessarily like not Star Wars the movie, like an actual program called Star Wars that would it was essentially a missile defense system in space. So if the USSR fired missiles at the United States, then satellites would shoot them down, which it was apparently feasible at the time to do that, and it scared the Russians quite a bit. And I don't know if it ever came to fruition. I'm pretty sure they released that it didn't, but
in theory, this stuff sounds pretty cool, right? A Space Force and like space missile defense stuff, right? But where are you going to pay for that?
Yeah, and there's people arguing that the money is already really there. It's just being allocated to like things that really don't achieve much. Someone mentioned that I saw in a comment thread somewhere that we're too content with staying within the Earth's orbit and just doing experiments on the space station and all this other kind of stuff. And I don't think it is a actual, very good use of resources. I mean, there's very little that has come out of these experiments on the space station. And I think it would be better that if exploration was actually conducted. Now, making a sixth branch of the military that's involved with space, I think it's mostly for terms of national defense, and weaponizing space is something that other countries haven't gotten into, to our knowledge. So I think that's being ahead of the curve is probably, I don't know. I don't think it's a good idea at all, because it's still going to cost a lot of money, as you said.
Yeah, and however important it may be to those in office, I think space exploration and considering bigger things in space is good and an important thing for people in general to do and to think about. when you're talking about, though, the U.S. government and the budget and where that money comes from and all these things and how much we already spend on the military, it's bothersome to consider adding more to the top of that.
Of course, it is kind of interesting for, and exciting for people who are currently in the military, because they're probably going to all try to switch branches, and all the people in the Space Force are probably going to immediately try out for Ranger School so they can be a legitimate Space Ranger.
Yeah, just for the title, right? Like Space Marine or Space Ranger or something like that.
I would totally do that. I would apply to the Ranger School, change my last name to Lightyear, and I would literally be Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger. Just for the memes. That's all.
Just so you could say you did it.
Yep.
Just introduce yourself at dinner. Hi, I'm Buzz Lightyear. It's not so bad. It does sound kind of fun. So it's funny, right? Because we talk about this, and the only thing I can think of, right, is like, oh, great, galactic imperialism. Does that kind of sound like the last thing the U.S. government needs?
Donald Trump is literally Darth Vader.
Right. He's a Sith. Oh, I can hear it now. That's a good one. So, aside from this, the United States Starship Troopers, have you been keeping an eye on the news as it pertains to tariffs lately?
Yes, actually. There was a pretty good discussion that I had with a couple colleagues and family about the what occurred at the G7 summit. It was kind of an interesting interaction between Trump and Merkel, and as I understand it, like Merkel was very pretty angry with Trump for like these tariffs, and they're trying to strong arm everybody. And he mentioned something that was kind of to the effect of, well, let's just not have any, which was kind of and I was like, wait,
God damn it, Donnie, what are you doing?
and I don't know, I don't know if I'm just hanging on that sentence a little bit too much, but if that actually happens, then I will concede that the 4D Chessers were right. That it was the art of the freaking deal, guys. But I don't know. It probably flew over because kind of like him being facetious. So, well,
I think it's like a Trumpism, right? Is he's kind of it. I think it's so funny about Trump is you've got this, like all of his supporters, you can just like their go-to is, well, what he really meant was, and this is another one of those situations where it probably what he really meant was like, in a perfect world, you wouldn't need tariffs because everyone would be fair. Well, right. That's likely his sentiment.
Yeah. And it was probably like, well, you want free trade. You want your countries to be prosperous. Well, let's stop this, kind of thing. But I think everybody in that room probably thought that sentiment was like, oh, well, now you're just being ridiculous. And then that gives him like room to move with what he says and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if he was being serious or not, but you're right, Vinny. The whole, like, a lot of his supporters go in like, well, what he meant was, and it was funny seeing interactions between people relating to this. And someone was making the argument like, well, maybe this was all a whole scheme to try to get tariffs, like to lower tariffs instead of raise them, and to put like the pressure on people to realize that this is, when it's done to them, that it sucks. And, on world leaders that like, well, when tariffs are in your country, it sucks. And then it kind of brings them to the bargaining table a little bit. And the supporters of Trump's tariffs will do that whole, well, what he meant was thing. So it was kind of funny to see some Trump supporters go against what he was saying. you know.
Yeah, what he meanters.
Well, what he meant was, yeah.
Right. Right. And it's funny because people will say that, like, oh, it's a negotiation tactic. And I suppose that's well and good, and I get the argument, but meanwhile, there's, we're like balls deep in trade war here. You got right. So China's setting off theirs, and we got ours. I believe the United States government, I believe, has enacted theirs on China now, and then we've got all this conflict with Canada, as I'm sure everyone's heard.
You said now, isn't it?
I did.
Rothbard rolling in his grave.
I know. I corrected myself quickly.
Yeah, I know.
And then there's what is it? Iran, I think, is coming with some tariffs as well. They're getting in on this party.
Oh yeah. Let me see if I can find something about that.
Yeah, so things are really heating up. Things are getting real fun. If you're curious, you can head over to our YouTube channel at Think Liberty TV, and I actually did a video on tariffs, and it was one of my earlier videos, so try not to judge me if the video quality isn't astounding. But it generally summarizes my position on tariffs pretty well. Right. The loser here is the consumer in the economy with the tariff.
Mm-hmm.
And that much should be apparent. The winner is the industry, right? Where the tariff exists, right? So when we talk about this, for instance, like the steel industry, I think it was something like a 25% tariff. So, people that worked in the steel industry were really excited at the advent of this tariff because now, there is no cheaper option on the market. They can't be undercut. So they can get more business. So they're excited about it. And then on the other side of it, you have everyone that buys steel, who probably isn't as excited as now the lower priced option is off the market. And, so it's going to raise the mean for the price of steel, which last time I checked, we use steel on a few things. I did it again. Steel is used on a few things.
Quite a few things.
Here in the States. Yeah, just a few.
Like automobiles. Which if relating to the past couple of years, the American auto industry had been suffering quite a bit, mostly because of like lack of sales, competing markets. Honda and Toyota building plants here, things like being able to deliver their cars cheaper to the American market, things like that, and that's been the case for the past, 20 years, competition within the market that way. And of course we had the bailouts and things like that. So yeah. And I don't think that this necessarily helps that situation for them, but also beer. Hey guys.
Oh God. Yeah.
Hey guys. Did you know that beer comes in aluminum cans?
Yep. We tariffed that.
Yeah. So you could say that there's a tax on beer. Those memes were going around for a little bit. So I actually looked up the Iran tariff thing, and apparently Iran has a lot of tariffs on stuff. But they have free trade zones, which avoid the non-tariff barriers, such as value-added service or VAT. So it's kind of interesting.
Just everywhere, all over the place. Everyone's tariffing everybody. And here's Trump. I'd like to get to no tariffs. By the way, here's more tariffs. What the hell's going on?
Hey, you know those tariff things? We need more of those.
The only way we're going to get none of them is if we use more of them. That's thinking like government right there, though. That's government 101.
The only way that we'll get to not spending so much money on roads is if we build more of them.
That's right. The only way to stop killing people is we just got to kill a little more people.
The only way, the only way to, like, gosh, you could just keep going with this. I'm just going to, yeah, just keep going with this. The only way to keep people from misusing the healthcare system is to publicly fund it and put more money into it.
Yes, to misuse the healthcare system. If we misuse the healthcare system, then the American people won't misuse the healthcare system.
Yeah.
The only way to stop a monopoly from
is to create a monopoly, but this one will be legal.
That's right. You just have to have the monopoly that has a monopoly on monopolies, and then everyone can be safe from monopolies.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Yeah, people actually think this.
And if they don't like it, and if people want to create a competing force to go against the monopoly, well, then that's illegal, and the law has to be enforced, right, Vinny? The law is absolutely correct every time, of course, and you have to throw people in jail if they go against the law. And of course, we're getting to the point of public public acceptance that all the laws on the books are kind of they broke the law, so that's the thing. Like, it's not even an issue of government, I would say. Well, it is, but it's an issue of like public perception. Like, just so many people are apathetic of like, well, I guess they made this new law, so I guess I need to do it.
Well, and it's a lack of critical thinking,
right?
Because when something gets passed or when something comes down the pipe, I think people just kind of naturally look at what's written on its face, right? No one's questioning anything really anymore. They just kind of see what it is on its face, and they judge their perception of morality based on what they interpret from what's written on its face, right? And I think that those in government know this, obviously, clearly. That's why they go and they name things, the Patriot Act, that probably isn't very patriotic at all. And they name things like the Liberty Act, which has absolutely nothing to do with liberty, because they know that people kind of look at these things, as face value. And someone looking at the absolute surface would just say, oh, the Liberty Act, how can I be against liberty? That's such a good word. That's such an American word. And then they look a little further into it. And
French,
even then, what's that?
French, but okay.
Well, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
A feely goody,
a feel good word,
a feel good American dream kind of word.
And that's why I liked some of the antics by, not antics is a bad word, but some of the actions by Massey and Rand Paul. In the bill, some of the bills that they've proposed, like Rand Paul's tax plan was literally the penny bill. Like, that's what it was called, because it was going to take a penny off of every dollar that was spent by the federal government. It's like, that's literally what it was going to do. It was a 1% reduction in spending, and it didn't pass. So,
Jesus.
But the thing is, I like my point is I like that they're being frank about it. They're not trying to give it some touchy-feely goody name to try to get people on board with it, And Massey, of course, had his one page bill, that was a while back, but
right. They're not trying to cloak it in order to get it over the finish line.
No, it's like you can literally read this in 20 seconds. So yeah, you have no excuse for not. So that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, and another problem also is thinking that every problem that anyone has needs to be solved with laws.
True.
With state action, right? Because this is the big problem. I mean, there are so many laws for so many different things, and laws shouldn't be something that you have no idea, if you're breaking or not. And that truly is the case for, most of these things. You've got, drug policies that are just ever changing and ever growing. There's, immigration, right? We can get into that here in a minute. There's just, tons of laws for tons of different things. And people, social outrage comes about for any one incident. And, the next sentiment that comes after that is Congress must act. Right. And people are just pushing, chomping at the bit for new laws,
right,
to support the positions that they prefer. And what ends up happening is there's all these unintended consequences or these loopholes created by these laws. And that's the part where, when I was talking about critical thinking, comes into play. And not a lot of people are doing that. They're quick to say, okay, we can solve this by this law. And they don't think about any of the consequences or repercussions that come from that law. And then we end up with this litany of laws, many of which are unjust, as according to our own Constitution and Bill of Rights. And that's a precarious situation that we find ourselves in more often than we'd probably like to admit these days.
Right. And I covered this a little bit in an article that's actually going to be going out pretty soon here on the Think Liberty website, is that laws are not not directly moral, and they're never meant to be. The laws of nations and of the United States are not meant to be a moral code. And once they start becoming that, or once they start being treated as that, you can start to see a degradation of almost like a nihilistic feeling of what actual like morality is, actually what morality is, but then also what the law should be. You start to see people just kind of have a whimsical, or not whimsical, but lackadaisical view of those two things, or in relation to each other, because it's like, well, I guess they passed this, so I guess that's what everybody should do, or what everybody ought to do. The law starts to become what everybody ought to do, which was generally accepted as like a moral code.
Right. And this kind of touches into a little bit of some stuff we were talking about on our Sacred Cows episode, when people are talking about people treating the state as a religion almost. Mm-hmm. I think this is absolutely a byproduct of that concept. You're talking about just laws coming down the pipe, and it's just accepted. This is okay. This is our benevolent, this being that hands us rights and laws, and we just accept it. Yeah, I think that's absolutely, an example of that into play there.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that kind of brings us into our next topic, if you wanted to get into that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure that anyone's listening is familiar with what's been going on our southern border. You've got Jeff Sessions, who essentially decided that now a little bit of backing here. So Jeff Sessions, and from us, like I think Liberty, we've taken tons of shots at Jeff Sessions, and rightfully so. But Jeff Sessions, his position is, and always has been, he's just going to enforce and uphold the letter of the law. That's like his thing, right? I'm sure, Chris, you're familiar with this as well. That's like his motto. If he had a tagline, that would be it. And so what happened is, when the Trump administration decided that they were going to tighten down on immigration, there was a decision made that, and keep me honest here, Chris, that by definition, illegal immigrants that were trying to cross the border were going to now be persecuted as federal criminals. Correct? Is that right, Chris?
In so many words, I think you're on the right track. I don't know if it's exactly correct, but that the talks were definitely made relating to that, for sure. Let me see.
Right.
Move on for a bit.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I might have the wrong term, but as best I know, what ended up happening was, these were normally treated one way, which was like probably like more of a misdemeanor or like civil case type situation. And the administration had decided, okay, we're now going to treat these as like federal, like prosecute them as like federal crimes. Mm-hmm. So with that said, what ended up happening is, because of that shift, because of the escalation of how the crime, quote unquote, is categorized, the enforcement of it changed, right? So as such, there's this settlement that came. Let's see, I have it up here. It's called the Flores Settlement, and that's in, I'll read a bit of what I have here. It's in 1985, two organizations filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of immigrant children who had been detained by the former Immigration and Naturalization Service, challenging procedures regarding the detention, treatment, and release of children. After many years of litigation, including an appeal to the United States Supreme Court, the parties reached a settlement in 1997. And then it goes on to kind of state exactly what it laid out. And it's 1, the government is required to release children from immigration detention without unnecessary delay. 2, in order of preference, parents, other adult relatives, or licensed programs willing to accept custody. 2, if suitable placement is not immediately available, the government is obligated to place children in the least restrictive setting appropriate to their age and any special needs. And 3, the government must implement standards relating to the care and the treatment of children in immigration detention. So,
yeah. So, Vinny, to answer your question, yes. So there was a policy shift, and Homeland, after the policy shift, Homeland Security promised to prosecute 100% of illegal immigration cases. So, and it was also noted that the new approach would separate thousands of children from their parents when they are arrested. So yes, they started to be treated as federal crimes.
Right, and so when it's treated as a federal crime, there's a different kind of enforcement that goes along to it, and then it falls back onto this Flores settlement when it talks about how exactly the kids are handled. Now, as part of this, the precedent that comes from this settlement, I believe, it is that children shall not be detained in the same areas as the adults.
Well, yes, segregate, like that's pretty much like a standard like detention procedures, but segregation of that kind of thing. So yeah,
right. And so this all kind of falls back onto that, right? And so you're seeing a lot of people in a lot of these left-leaning media outlets that are claiming that there's a big hubbub about this, right? Because Trump came out and he said that this is the Democrats' fault. And he essentially kind of cited what we're outlining here, but he said, it was the Democrats' fault. I believe it was passed by Reno or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Janet Reno. Yep.
Right. She was the AG at the time. Mm-hmm. So, he's leaning on that. It's just one of those slippery things. And then you have these fact check sites that come out and they're saying that it's false just because, Trump's always got to be wrong no matter what. But whether or not he phrases it entirely correctly, he does kind of speak to a larger point, right? What they did is they changed the category of the quote unquote crime, and it just kind of fell back to the legal precedents that were there, if that were to have happened. So, make no mistake, what's going on now is no different than what would have happened if the Obama administration had done the same thing.
Well, if the Obama administration had done the same thing.
Well, right. If they changed the category of the crime.
Right. Well, the thing is, people have noted that who are somewhat in support of this, that of Trump, of the administration and the policy change and like all this other kind of stuff, noted that these places did exist where like detention centers for children, and they during the Obama administration, and they were pretty awful. Yeah.
In 2015, I believe. Yep. There were stories that were floating around about it.
Yeah, there was. I remember those. And now apparently they're not. And apparently they have games and pool tables and things like that. And which is nice when I'm just looking at it going, gosh, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, well, and there are these pictures that just came out where they're showing some of these detention centers, I guess, from some of the recent times that this is happening, and it's just pretty much like chain link fence, and these kids have these those reflective heat absorbing blankets and stuff like that, and it's rough. It looks rough, it sounds rough, I'm sure it is rough. There's a piece of legislation in there somewhere in the policy that says that essentially United States federal employees can't touch the children, so they've got like other immigrant children having to change, other immigrant children. It doesn't sound like a good time. I'll say that much.
Well, the thing is, that's very, very odd to me, because what if a fight happens? Do you not stop it?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure. And that's
if a fight happens in a prison, then the COs, they call the quick response team, and guys in padded seats and helmets, and they break the fight up. Is that going to happen here, or are they just going to let them fight? Like, if they're not
I guess you got to
touch the kids, then how are you supposed to be able to stop that? I don't know.
I would assume though that there's probably a smaller instance of kids fighting here than.
Yeah,
but you never know.
I mean, if you have like adolescents, like teenagers and stuff, then that could
right.
become an issue. You know.
Right. Absolutely.
Just because of physical size. So.
Right. Yeah, and like this, I guess. So there's a whole process involved here, and I suppose for the most part, from what I understand, the policy goes about as fast as a government policy can. But it's complicated when the topic of asylum is brought up. So if any of these individuals being prosecuted bring up asylum, from what I understand, that complicates the legal process here a bit, and it prolongs things. Which just kind of exacerbates this issue going on between separating the children.
So like the people seeking asylum and stuff like that, or not asylum.
Yes.
Yeah, but
yeah. When they state that they're seeking asylum, apparently it changes the method in which the prosecution goes.
Yes.
And from what I understand, it draws it out significantly more than it would be normally. So when you have these situations where, children are separated from their families and then they claim asylum, then you're looking at, as I said, a situation of separation that's now further exacerbated by, having a larger space of time,
which is,
in between that separation,
which is kind of, feel like that could be definitely improved. But especially if somebody is genuinely seeking asylum from a hostile environment and all of that. So
from just a kind of like a purely humanity standpoint, it is
humanitarian standpoint, that kind of thing.
It seems insensitive for sure. And as I understand, so due to all of the backlash and all the outrage that's coming from this, as I understand, I think I saw something somewhere saying that Paul Ryan and a few others were trying to kind of address the matter as far as the separation goes. I'm not sure exactly how they intend on doing that, but I'm sure they're going to try and probably do something to keep the families together in these detention centers.
Yeah, First Lady Laura Bush released a statement about it. The former First Lady Laura Bush, basically saying that it's wrong, which it's kind of interesting because situations like this happened during the Bush administration as well. So not of something of like not this exact situation, but it definitely happened where kids were like separated from asylum seekers and things like that during the Bush administration. So I found it kind of odd, but there's definitely prominent people that are against this, and not necessarily just your usual celebrity,
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a big outcry kind of from all over the place about this. Once the press got in and was able to take pictures of what's going on there, I don't think anyone looks at it and it's like, all right, well, I take that back. I'm sure plenty of people are like, yes. But I think generally it's something that upsets folks. And people are also equating this a bit to what happened, during World War II. I've seen this as something that's been going on, and this is a bad look. That's not a good thing to do.
It's a bad look, but I mean, let's not. I feel like people saying that it's like, oh well, this is like the Japanese internment camps. It's like, I think saying that kind of devalues the actually how atrocious the Japanese internment was. Like, it was pretty bad. Like, people were in like plywood buildings with like inadequate facilities and blankets, and their food was apparently terrible, and and they were in prison for being Asian, not necessarily Japanese, but East Asian.
And a big differentiator here too is that there was a lot of people that were U.S. citizens and had been for some time.
Oh well, a lot of them.
Yeah,
were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is not the case here. I mean, if you wanted to talk about like the Dreamers, and the DACA stuff, that's another topic. But for this, what we're talking about, what's in the news cycle now, that is not, what this is. So
right.
When people compare it to the Japanese camps, I just don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's a legitimate talking point there.
I don't think it is either. Yeah, I also think it's a legitimate talking point on another vein of people that say, well, the people who commit crimes in the U.S., their kids get separated from them. So how is this any different? And it's like, okay, it's very different because, those kids, the kids that get, of criminals in the United States, they go to prison, and then it's like, well, then most of the time what ends up happening is families take care of them, and then if that is not an option, then they're not thrown in a holding facility. It's kind of going the other way with it, where they're not thrown in a holding facility. They'll throw all these kids together in a room and be like, okay, you're going to be here until your parents get out of prison, which might be like 10 years. It's not a similar situation at all. And
right, yeah, not comparable.
It's really not a comparable situation, which shows how it's like, well, we need to prosecute these people as federal criminals. It's like, well, there's obviously different things at play here, and the laws pertaining to immigration are very, very different to somebody who gets caught with a pound of weed in their car who's lived in the United States their whole life. It's just completely different situations, and there's different laws that go into it, and it needs to be approached in a different way. And I think simplifying it to that extent of saying, oh, well, kids of criminals in the United States, they get separated from their parents, is just asinine. It's like you said, it lacks cognitive thinking. And I've seen way too many people use this excuse to try to justify it, which it also brings up kind of another point that I mentioned before we started the podcast, is that it's not that the people who commit the crime, it's not that we're against people, who commit a crime should go to prison. We're protesting the law that exists. So saying it's against the law though, so they should go to prison. It's like, well, okay, we're attacking the laws that exist, not the fact that people should just be criminals and be able to not go to prison or something. That's non sequitur. We're talking about, we're opposed to the certain laws that are in place.
Right, exactly right. It's not a matter of appealing to authority and just saying, well, it's a law, so it's fine, it's good. It's you're questioning whether or not the law is just, right? And so in this situation, it's absolutely fair to look at the law as has been decided by the Trump administration, that would say, okay, these people are no longer this category of criminal. They are now this category of criminal, which warrants this different kind of enforcement. And you question whether or not that's just.
Right.
And whether or not that's a fair law. And that's something that more people should do more often, is question these laws, question these things that are in place, right? Because when you're talking about this stuff, as you can see by listening to us kind of unpack this is no simple thing, right? This is kind of in line with Chris. I don't know if you remember, but there was a few episodes before where we kind of talked about tariffs in the same way, when we talked about how there's this crazy, like, spider webs on spider webs of details and policies and laws and different things that have been decided for different kind of reasons that are in place by all different kinds of administrations that kind of like hold a lot of this stuff up. Right. And so at a certain point, the system is kind of, it's at a victim to itself, because of how complicated and intertwined it is with all these different kind of details and laws and stipulations. And these are the kind of situations that you get into, right? Is one person decides to change one thing, and that one thing falls on this other thing that was set in place back, years before. And it has led to this thing that we're now seeing, right? It's just exactly what we were talking about previously, these unforeseen consequences that come from just this litany of laws all over the place, right? Which is exactly what happens when, you've got this one central body that's just in charge of everything, making the rules and calling the shots about everything. And here we have it, right?
Right.
Just as we discussed.
Yeah, exactly. It's also good to note that the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy is actually not mandated by a law, and that it could easily be, they could exercise discretion in this area, like instead of another area. It's literally a pointed thing towards immigration instead of, Trump administration doesn't really care in the case like this of like small time marijuana users. It's like, oh, well, if they said that, it's like a zero tolerance policy for breaking a federal law, well, then why don't they just go into Colorado and start rounding up a bunch of stoners? Well, obviously it's not a zero tolerance policy across the board then. It's just for immigration. So take that into consideration. If it's the law, then, well, why aren't all these other people getting thrown in prison too?
Right.
It's literally the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing kind of thing.
Yeah. It's just this big bureaucratic mess.
Yep.
Which is why we're such big fans of the bureaucracy that comes with government.
Right.
Big fans.
Right. And then the bigly huge fans, let me tell you.
Big, huge. We are the biggest fans.
No one is a bigger fan of the bureaucracy than I am. No one knows more about bureaucracy than I do. Believe me. So I also take issue with the way that this is, like major, huge issues with the ways that this is being, rationalized. That by the White House press secretary and also the attorney general, and the usage of the Bible to try to rationalize this. Now, with the article my article that's going to go up, I kind of go into the weeds about it, but just as a base, as a quick, overview of this, it's like there should be absolutely take issue with this, that, the establishment of a religion is something that's not a line that you're not supposed to toe. And very much saying that, oh, well, our laws and our policies are divine, alluding to that our laws and our policies are divinely ordained is something that I think is a bad precedent to set for sure. And it annoys me that, that there's a lot of religious folks that aren't noticing this. So, yeah. Well,
it's all team sports, right? If Jeff Sessions comes out and he starts,
if all the laws and all the authority were, were right and morally just because the leader is ordained by God, then King Herod's order to kill firstborn babies was just.
Right, and that's a bit of a slippery slope.
Yeah,
there. It's team sports, right? It's like, I was saying, people are they're either on the team or they're not, and if they're on the team, they're like, yeah, old Sessions got up there and he threw some scripture at me, and yeah, I support it, and that's just kind of where they land. It's that whole critical thinking thing we've been talking about. They don't think about whether or not it was relevant or whether or not it was contextual to the topic that he was discussing. They're just like, hey, Sessions got up there, he said some God stuff, support it.
And then, of course, if you're not religious, it's just kind of like, well, I don't care about that anyway, so that's not going to sway my decision at all. And so it really didn't do much, in my opinion, to try to sway people over to, oh yeah, this might be a good thing to do. Try to sway public support at all. It just
I mean, I just read it and I was like, how did I don't know if that's as supportive a bit of information as you think it is, Jeff. I don't,
yeah.
I'm not. You might want to read that again.
Anyway,
I'm sure you'll cover that in your article, so we'll leave.
Yeah, we'll leave that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've used a good bit of time. I think that was a good chat. Not bad. 45 minutes is pretty good considering we're here winging it on our own. What do you think, buddy?
Yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, I think we kind of fleshed out the topics pretty well. If anybody wants to join the Space Force, leave a comment. Leave a comment on Facebook or on our SoundCloud, because I don't know, I might become a statist to be Buzz Lightyear. I don't know. We'll see.
Buzz Lightyear, Space Ranger. Stay tuned, and we'll keep you updated on that. And well, I guess that's as good a place to call it as any. We've got all of our links that we did in the front. So I guess on behalf of Chris and everyone else that's a part of the Think Liberty Network, thank you for listening. And whether or not you like it, we'll probably be back again.